Hey, Mr. Bracy. I'm Jansen, and I'm gonna be doing my presentation here, on video since you didn't have any slots today. Um, so, my presentation is on, if the use of atomic weaponry or some other means of mass destruction was necessary to end World War II, because I feel like that's a debate that's really been sparked in the last couple of years, especially. Um, among people. It's like, did America really have to do this? Did America need to do this? So I'm gonna be giving this little presentation on what I believe it was necessary. Not saying it was good, but it was necessary to. It saved more lives than it took. If we're thinking about it here, that's kind of my thesis statement. Um, yeah. So I'm gonna open up with a little famous quote from Emperor Hirohito of Japan, that he spoke on August, I think it was 15th, yeah, August 15th, 1945. If you see my eyes go to the side here, I have my whole entire essay literally right next to my phone. So if it looks like I'm not paying attention, I am paying attention. I just needed to read stuff off my computer because I don't have this whole thing memorized. Um, yeah, so here's the really famous quote, literally day after the 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, which goes as, should we continue to fight, it would not only result in an ultimate collapse and obliteration of the Japanese nation, but also would lead to total extinction of human civilization. Um, this broadcast, it wasn't a speech, it was a broadcast that was spoken out day after the 2 atomic weapons, Fat Man and Little Boy, sorry, I get them mixed up sometimes, Fat Man and Little Boy were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, resulting in several 100,000 of people dying immediately. That doesn't even include the people that died from radiation poisoning and future relations to radiation. There's actually scientific research. I didn't include this in the essay because I didn't think about it, but there's several bits of research that keep showing that in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there's still an increased rate in birth defects and things like that. I don't know why I didn't include that here. That would actually been really nice to include. But because of atomic stuff seeping into soil and into food, which results in people basically consuming trace amounts of radiation, which over time is going to add up and result in stuff happening. Especially if you've got if you're pregnant, if a woman's pregnant and they're consuming radiation, what do you think that's going to do to the baby? If you think fetal alcohol syndrome is bad, a picture people consuming radiation, what's that going to do to your kid? Going back to it, I kind of got off. If it sounds like I go off on stuff, that's just me trying to make this sound all the more authentic and not like I'm being a robot. So hopefully you like that. Anyway, so at this point in the war, August 15th, 1945, the Emperor of Japan saw truly what America was capable of, and he needed desperately to surrender. All traditions that I'm going to mention later, such as Bushido and honor and stuff like that, go completely out the window here, and they had to finally just wave the white flag. We can't do this anymore. They knew if they took more than 2, they were done. Like there's no coming back from an atomic weapon, really. I mean, obviously they can, but it's like it's not going to be like in the war they're going to come back. Obviously, Japan has had a resurgence as a nation since the 1940s, which is great. Japan's awesome, and hopefully there's no actual bad blood. That's a stupid statement. Forget that I said that. So then I asked the question, but was the dropping of these 2 weapons of mass destruction really necessary to end World War II with Japan? And that's the end of my introduction there. I'm not sure how you wanted citations in this one, so I guess I'll just kind of say it. Citations used in this paragraph was the Atomic Heritage Foundation, specifically the Jewel Voice broadcast. When I upload this to YouTube, and then submit it to you, I'll also include the paper so you can read over it. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do that, but I'm going to make it work. I'll make it work. Yeah. So you can see, my citations and stuff, and then I forgot, I think it was 8, all 8. Anyway, so on August 14th, 1942, research for the Manhattan Project started. By now, America had already been in World War II for well over a year. They'd been in about it for, about a year and a half at this point. And they were really desperate. They kept losing men, with the Japanese because of their Japanese sort of code of conduct, that I'll be getting into in I think it's 1 or 2 paragraphs. War was gruesome. It was gut-wrenching, and America knew the Japanese were really relentless, because they were bound by a really twisted version of a former samurai code called Bushido, spelled Bushido, if you want to look it up, and the origins of it. The origins of it are super, super interesting as it relates to samurais. That might be just me who finds it interesting, but I find it really interesting where it's all started and how it, in my opinion, devolved into a, you don't surrender, you don't do anything, go until you're dead sort of thing in war. Which is very different from how it was in samurai times. So if you want to look into that, I would look into that yourself, because that's a really interesting thing to look into, in my opinion. Anyway, so they were bound by a twisted version of samurai code of Bushido, which was they were more likely to actually kill themselves than they were to surrender. They were more willing to kill themselves than they were to surrender. Worded that bad. And with no real other choice, America gathered the greatest minds in science, such as J. Robert Oppenheimer, can't pronounce that name sometimes, and Enrico Fermi. Sorry, my computer is kind of far away because I wanted this video to not look like it was recorded of just my face, like a TikTok. So I got my computer over here, and sometimes the text is just too small, can't see it. So people like, Oppenheimer are working over the clock. America's like, all right, you can have all the money, resources, people you need. Make something that will shake the world to its core. Obviously not the exact words of the military, but that's what they implied. They wanted something that, I was going to say blew the world's socks off, but that's kind of a very bad saying in this case. Anyway, so the government wanted something so powerful and so terrible that it would leave Japan literally no choice but to surrender. And this led to the creation and testing of the first couple of atomic bombs through 1944. And then, whatchamacallit? 1945, they started to really make progress in 1944. And then July 1945 came around, and they had the first atomic weapon. This was not Fat Man or Little Boy. This was a test, which they then dropped in, where was it? I think it was New Mexico. I don't know why I keep thinking of details that I didn't include in this thing that I then say. Yeah, for some reason, when I speak, I put in way more detail than I do on the paper. So that kind of is going to probably bite me in the butt here. Anyway, so July 16th, 1945 rolls around. They drop the first atomic weapon in America as a test in, once again, I believe it's New Mexico. And the test was a huge success. Test was a huge success. And then after that, about basically a month later to the day, the two real atomic weapons were dropped. 160,000 people were basically vaporized in the blink of an eye. That's just the people who were in the bomb's general radius. This is not going out past, the point where it creates a sonic boom, which is basically just going to send people flying for probably hundreds of feet. that's not gonna, I'm not gonna get too into the gruesome details because, atomic weapons are really awful in what they do, but they are a very powerful weapon. And this was just ingenuity at its finest. So basically 160,000 estimated people between the two bombs were vaporized in literally the blink of an eye. 160,000 people gone. It was so bad that people were literally turned into shadows. Like, their atoms couldn't vaporize so fast enough. Like, their atoms, I can't remember if it's their atoms vaporized too slow for the time to comprehend, really, but it basically left a shadow on a brick wall. Like, if a person was walking, say I'm walking, I have a wall right here, you can't see it, but I have a wall right here, and say I'm standing here, and an atomic bomb drops on the other side of my room. That's a bad example. I think, a mile away, I think is about what it was for this phenomenon to occur. But my body would vaporize instantaneously. But my shadow, like the shadow from the sun coming down, would basically stick this to the wall forever. And I can't remember if it's, I forget which museum they're in, but I think it's in Japan. There's a museum in Japan where some of those walls were actually carved out, like, off the buildings, and put in museums, because it's a phenomenon you're probably never going to see again, hopefully. But yeah, I'm talking too much. I'm just going to try to focus more on the paper now. Where was I? And several hundred thousands more were basically just killed over time. 160,000 gone instantaneously. That's not including the several hundred thousands that died over time due to complications with radiation poisoning and its side effects. But could this have been avoided if America had pursued some sort of alternative? Once again, I'm going to quote the citation here. I used the Atomic Archive, Design of Two Bombs. The Atomic Archive is the website, and then Design of Two Bombs is the page. So if you hear me say, like, the first part I'm always going to say is the author or the website. Pardon me. And the thing I say next is going to be the specific page. Moving on. With Japanese soldiers being, so committed to their new twisted version of the Bushido Code, a once sacred belief system in samurai times, and specifically used by samurais. I believe it was also taken up by other soldiers in different parts of the country, or at least something similar to it. They were raised, believing surrender and being taken prisoner was humiliating and dishonorable to their home country of Japan. And this led to the practice of, I'm hoping I pronounced this right, seppuku, seppuku, which is formal ritual performed by the Japanese soldiers where they would, in the situation of they're being overran, about to be overran, or they're taken prisoner or about to be taken prisoner, they would ceremoniously slice their stomach open with a miniature katana. I can't remember the specific name of it. It had a very specific name. Because I know there's miniature katanas, and then there's this, which is basically the same size as the miniature. It's not a miniature katana. It's also it's a separate blade, but it's basically the same thing. But it's specifically used for this purpose. And I believe every soldier had one. Anyway, so they would do that to avoid the fate of imprisonment, being overran, being defeated. That's dishonorable. Seppuku was the way to go. With Japan being such a persistent army that didn't seem to be bothered by casualty rates, America really needed to figure something out to get them to surrender or give up or just leave them alone altogether. I'm sure America at this time would have been like, I don't care what happens here. I just don't want to keep losing men. Because a lot of the most gruesome battles, despite popular belief, like, in total amount of American soldiers lost, most of those were actually Japanese and not in the European side with the Germans. Generally, with casualty statistics, it combines both sides and how many soldiers died per battle. But if you really look at like the amount of American soldiers lost, generally most of the most bloody battles for Americans were actually in Japan. There are a few exceptions to this on the German side. But it was, a lot of it was Japan, because Japan was so utterly persistent. Like, sure, for every American soldier that died, it was probably like 2 Japanese soldiers died, because it's not that the Japanese were uncoordinated. They didn't care. They didn't mind dying. They wanted to win. Anyway, gonna keep going here. America really needed to figure out, something to do to make them surrender. They're at the point where it's like, they're desperate. They need something. So the first thing they could have possibly done, without using mass destruction, was really let the war play out. And obviously this isn't a good choice, because I'm just using this as a specific example. The American army had about 16 million soldiers, 16.5 million soldiers, in the 1940s during World War II. Meanwhile, the Japanese army had, 9.1 million about. These are estimates. Obviously, we're very far removed, and documentation wasn't as great at the time. So we can only work with estimates and what we seem to somewhat know. Anyway, so if they let it play out and they traded 1 American soldier life for 1 Japanese soldier life, they're looking at Americans only having 7.3 million soldiers left. And that's still a lot, but that's devastating losses for both sides. So that obviously, it would work, in quotations, but that's, you're losing, 9.1 million soldiers in this, in this kind of scenario. If they're trading off 1 for 1, which in war is not the case. You're not trading off 1 for 1. You're more than likely one side's going to lose more than the other. Statistically, one side's going to lose more than the other. I'm sure there are times where it has happened, where it's broken even, but very rare, I'd imagine. So obviously this wasn't an option. They're losing 9.1 million people, which is way more than we would have lost, or than we lost just by dropping 2 bombs. Moving on to another page. Another method America could have really tried, was just to, strategically take over Japan, piece by small piece. And with Japan having so many small islands that they conquered in their possession. Sorry, we have roofing people over, so if you hear weird banging, that's just people on the roof, cleaning our gutters, because we don't know how it happens, but whatever. I'm getting off topic. But if you do hear banging, nothing's happening, just people working on our roof outside. Anyway, so, this could have eventually worked if America was very careful. I can say that. This could have worked if America was very, 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 very strategic and very careful. Obviously, over time, Japan's going to realize, if America's taking over Japan, and what they've conquered, piece by piece, they're eventually going to realize it and go straight to their bigger, more important cities and fortify those things like crazy. War makes people, or makes the general population work way harder. I'm trying to think of an example. For some reason I can't. In times of war, people are going to work way harder because they want to live. They don't want to die. They want to win as well. They don't want to lose. They don't want to keep losing more people, which was the unfortunate case with a lot of places that were captured. They lost a ton of people after they were captured by a specific army, generally speaking. Anyway, so, if Japan realized what America was doing in this scenario, they're eventually going to have so much fortification on their big cities. America would have to pursue bombing, obviously, because you can't get tanks in, you can't get soldiers. If you can't get tanks in, you can't get soldiers in. What's the next choice? Aircraft. Now, they don't necessarily have to drop atomic bombs. No. They would drop napalm, which, if you don't know what napalm is a very, very, very long-lasting, highly, highly, highly flammable, extremely, extremely hot liquid, or something. It's not. I almost said it's foam. It's not like foam. It's for the sake of it, it's basically just gasoline deluxe. You know, they're gonna have this sort of thing where it's like it basically falls out and it's being out of the plane and it's basically being ignited as it goes out. So planes coming over big city, picture a big city right here, thriving city, extremely fortified. Planes, tons and tons and tons, probably hundreds of American planes are going to come over, start dropping napalm. So basically just fire from the sky, not rockets, just basically gasoline deluxe from the sky that just burns forever. Napalm does not stop burning. It literally lasts forever, almost. But it's like, as it's flying over, all this napalm coming out and landing on cities. Which, if you really think about it, is also going to cause mass destruction and civilian loss of life. Which, in war, civilian loss of life is going to happen. It's nearly unavoidable. Obviously there are times where it can be avoided, but it's like in war, civilians are going to die. And that's a very sad truth of war, is people are going to die. It doesn't matter how hard people try. Some people will also just unceremoniously go after civilians. It's screwed up, but it's a very unfortunate truth of war. And it's just kind of a somber fact. So that's not really an option either if we're taking into consideration of not using mass destruction. So it could work to an extent before it doesn't work. And that's the end of another paragraph. For this one, I used Michael Fassbender was the author here, and Bushido and Japanese Atrocities During World War II, published 2015, and then Foster Renita. I don't know. You'll see when you look at the page yourself if you're following along on your end. Foster Renita's Bushido Code of Ethics, placed above all else. Moving on. By the time the United States had really finished the Manhattan Project, which was the code name for the development of the 2 atomic weapons. Sorry if it feels like I'm sitting off camera here. I'm trying to be able to read my computer and look at the camera at the same time. And there's no real great way to do that. Maybe if I angle it like, okay, there we go. Hopefully that'll work. And tested, the weapon on July 16th, 1945. They were really faced with a choice, a really, really hard choice. That kind of, it's grown out of all this, Japan doesn't give up. They need a way to end the war here. But do they want to do this? They've seen what the atomic weapon can do through the testing, as I mentioned before, on July 16th, 1945, basically 1 month before they actually went through with it. Meaning, they obviously eventually made the choice to go through with it, but, yeah, they were faced with this really hard choice. And, the emperor, they eventually went through with it. And Emperor Hirohito's words on August 15th, 1945, so nearly 1 month later after testing, this is the day after. So this happened on August 14th, so nearly a month after testing, right? Made it abundantly clear how shocking the destruction was. But those all came after, months of planning and calculation. They're all getting, they've seen what it can do. They know what it can do. They just need to make this last decision. Yeah. And, with Japan being bound by Bushido Code, encouraged suicide rather than being captured. And, American commanders had seen repeatedly on battlefields, that's like, fighting these guys, if we can avoid it, is the best choice. They'd seen how vigorously they fight. If you look online, these stories are not hard to find, but there are Japanese soldiers who would be cripplingly wounded, they are going to die in minutes. Like, they're going to lose so much blood so fast from wounds they have attained from battle, and they will literally strive to get back up and fight for those last couple minutes if they can, and by any means necessary. If that meant getting another guy to, like, carry them so they could shoot the gun over their shoulder, basically, while being carried or something, they would do that. They wanted to fight. They wanted to win. Which is how war works. You're not in it to play. You're in it to go in there, and you're in it to win. If you're losing more guys. Where was I? Sorry. There's bound to be screw-ups in this video. Sometimes I lose my place. So, Americans realized these guys are literally willing to fight till the last man on his last breath. And, you know, normal soldiers are not going to do it anymore. They need something else. So, long wars, or, you know, prolonging it by any means longer than it has to be. So I'm going to adjust my sitting position real quick. Oh my gosh, I lost my place again. Are you joking me? I'd seen repeatedly on Pacific battlefields what that attitude meant. The islands that they did take were at an enormous cost. Japan was really good at fortifying. That's one thing I will give them credit for in war, is they were amazingly good at fortifying and holding down the fort. This is especially notable at little islands such as Okinawa and Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima, I think, I might be wrong, was one of the most bloody battles for American soldiers out there, because Japan was just so unbelievable. Number one, they were really good fighters. Like I said, they go to the last breath. They go to the last man. They want to win. They want to hold down the fort. And they were really good at fortification. And it really boggles your mind when you kind of go down the rabbit hole. I'm a history nerd for World War II, especially. And when you really go down the rabbit hole of what the Japanese did to make sure they won, or would at least have the best odds of winning, it goes like, wow, these guys thought of everything. And then, you know, future wars, that kind of rubbed off, I think, on the Viet Cong in Vietnam, because they were also incredibly good at fortification and literally preparing for any means of retaliation possible from American soldiers. That's a whole completely different tirade. I'm not going to go off on that one, but if you want to look more into, like, people who were really good at basically preparing for everything to give themselves the best odds possible, the Viet Cong in Vietnam and their tunnel systems is one I would highly recommend looking up, because that's super cool. And how they did it. Obviously, it's disgusting in the sense of it was gruesome, but it's extremely fascinating. So if you do look it up, be warned, stuff you're going to read is kind of messed up and gross in the sense of, you know, it's war, but it's incredibly interesting how they managed to think of everything. Back to my essay. Sorry, my brain likes to go off on little tirades like that. So if I've done that probably like 3 times in this video, and I don't want to bother redoing it because of that, because I'm going to be here for an hour if I keep doing that, and if I restart for every time my brain goes off. So please have a little bit of grace. So where was I? For some reason, I can never remember these, like, 2 paragraphs. I can remember the other ones reasonably well. Okay, so, you know, given the reality that the atomic bombs were argued to be the only way to get out of war, and I lost my place again. What is wrong with me? Given the reality, the atomic bombs were argued to be the only real way for a rapid and unconditional Japanese surrender, without launching an all-out invasion that would have killed hundreds of thousands more than the atomic bombs would have, or more, or a slow campaign of attacking cities, city by city, or a wait to see approach. You know, those aren't going to work either. So, and just allowed Japan more time. You know, a huge thing in war is time. You don't have a lot of it. You make use of what you've got for time. And if you don't have time, you make more by doing something. And that's probably, in all honesty, besides soldiers, that's going to be your most valuable resource in war is time. Like, time gives you the ability to figure stuff out. When you're in high stress situations of being, like, say, a commander, you're making calls in seconds. Like, the enemy just did this. What do we do, sir? You have seconds to say, okay, do this. You have seconds to think of a whole strategy in your head and do it. Especially if you're on battlefield and on site, which a lot of commanders were too. That was one thing. This was much more different than, you know, like formal battles, like English, British battles, whereas people would, you know, line up. The commanders are in the very back, like, yes, we will have the horses flank from this side, but first we will line our infantrymen up in the front. The commanders would sit in the very back. You know, they're sitting there like this, you know, watching their soldiers, you know, get shot. Which, you know, that's another tirade I'm not going to go off on. I'm trying to catch myself before I go off on more stuff, because this video will literally be an hour long if I don't stop. Anyway, so, you know, allowing Japan time for more mobilization is not an option too. Just nothing's working. That was their only option, really. That made sense for kind of the lives they would end up saving. Obviously, they're not actually saving lives. They're preventing more lives from being lost by taking lives, if that makes sense. And, you know, from the American point of view, demonstrating an overwhelming and sudden capacity to end the war broke, you know, all political culture and, you know, cultural logic. It made surrender instantaneous. It's like Japan had no idea what hit them. Like, nobody had seen anything like this. What am I saying? If that makes sense, it makes sense. They had never seen anything like it. Nobody had. Nobody knew anything like this was possible, and it made Japan shut down instantly. So surrender instantaneous. Can't do this again. Obviously, this logic of, like, we needed to end the war does not erase the horrors that happened in Hiroshima. I can't do foreign names for some reason, of cities, people, or anything, and Nagasaki. But it does kind of, you know, help explain why everyone believed at the time these two bombings were less horrible for everyone involved. It's like, you're losing several 100,000 people, but if we just let the war play out, you're losing millions. If we had just taken over every city bit by bit, devastating losses, probably millions again. You know, and only a shock of this size could result in a whole entire nation going, we're done. We can't do this. We surrender. We give up. Even despite their cultural code of Bushido, Japan they can't, no nation can handle an atomic bomb, let alone two. It's going to end stuff, especially at this time where it was unheard of. Obviously, in more modern, that's a known threat, is atomic weapons and nuclear weapons. But at this time, in the 1940s, those didn't exist. America made them exist. Anyway, so they basically, that's something so unbelievable. It made Japan go, we're done, despite all their belief systems and stuff. And then, you know, yeah, and then, you know, justification for it kind of really rides kind of on the kind of almost twisted or grim assumptions of the human brain under siege or extremely high stress. No part of war isn't stressful. You're in war. And with that, you know, how do you respond to this, you know? Because America in of itself, I'm going to go off on a tiny tirade here because my brain is going to like flip out if I don't. America didn't want to be a part of the World War. It didn't. It had been in it vaguely once, actually reasonably once in World War One, helping out Britain and stuff. And they didn't want it again. They had gone to war so much. America had been in so much war for the past 200 years up to that point, less than 200, like 150 years up to that point, that they were just like, yeah, we don't want any more. They wanted to sit on the sideline for this one, and America would have stayed that way if it weren't for Japan bombing Pearl Harbor in 43. For some reason, my brain can't remember the day. And that's going to bug me out for the next 3 days. But if Japan had not bombed Pearl Harbor, the war probably would have ended completely different. Because I feel like sooner or later, America would have seen their allies getting destroyed. Because goodness, their allies getting annihilated, and would have eventually stepped in, but they didn't want to step in. And with that, if America had not been bombed at the time it had, history would be completely different. I would put every dollar I have. If Japan had not made the decision to bomb Pearl Harbor, let alone do it halfway, the war would have played out completely differently, in my opinion. Little tirade. I'm gonna get back to it. I'm gonna wrap up this. Let's see. Where did that leave me off at? That little tirade. For American citizens, soldiers, generals, everyone in America, at the time, the use of the bombs was really just kind of a devastating necessity, I think is the best way to say it. To bring an end to a war against an enemy who would not surrender under any other circumstance. And that's really the core argument of dropping them. It's like, horrible as it was the only realistic and legitimate path to end the war and stop probably a further larger loss of life. Resources used, National Archives page, the National Archives website page, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then website, the National World War II Museum page, Battle of Iwo Jima, which I referenced earlier. And then, furthermore, this is going more away from the American side of it and going to the Japanese side of it. Japanese soldiers were really affected by Bushido mentally. Despite contrary belief, a lot of Japanese soldiers disagreed with Bushido, and it weighed heavily on them mentally. Knowing you had to kill yourself if you got overwhelmed in battle and were getting overran, or, the looming thought of that in soldiers' minds just really destroys your mental, puts an unfathomable amount of stress on literally every soldier of the Japanese army. It's a scenario where it's not a win-lose or a win-win. It's a lose-lose. You die either way. you can only really postpone the inevitable. You're either getting shot by an American or a soldier or a British soldier, or you're killing yourself. That's it. It was really just a preference over life. Honor over life is the best way to say it. Prime example, kamikaze pilots. Or just not even specifically kamikaze. I'm gonna move the computer. I need to make sure. Oh no. That I'm not in a weird position. Is this gonna work? No, it's just gonna fall over. Okay, you're getting moved here now. So I can actually read it and look at the camera. Phenomenal. Okay, so kamikaze pilots specifically, but also just all Japanese pilots, were I'm on the wrong page. I was trying to read something that had nothing to do with that. If a plane you were flying was shot to the point of severe malfunction, and destruction was imminent, your engine would blow up and then the whole plane blows up, the soldier was expected to at least attempt, bare minimum attempt, to steer the plane to hit something vital of the enemies. So if the guy's up here, and I'm gonna try to make sure you can see my hands, and there's a let's just say a boat, an important boat, an American boat, and these guys are this thing starts flying, and there's water here. If they can glide down and hit the water, they have a much higher, a completely higher chance of survival. But they were required to at least attempt to go and blow up the boat, or attempt to blow up the boat with the remnants of the plane, because the plane's going to explode either way, really, at that point. But it was really just like, might as well take something of theirs if they're taking something of ours, sort of. It was really just like that, over trying to find a place to at least attempt to land safely and at least somewhat guarantee survival. Post World War II, it was completely and utterly proven that literally almost every soldier, unless you were mentally ill, had PTSD or some form of depression, specifically from Bushido Code during World War II, because of how much it weighed on their mental. And I'll get into further in a minute in the next paragraph about, really what happened if you didn't obey Bushido, because it's a really messed up rabbit hole. Anyway, and it, even at the bare minimum, it would, for Japanese soldiers who went through Bushido and lived with the looming thought of, you're gonna die, it's the ones who survived were considered dishonorable and wimps, and it took them several years to just readjust to just living. Which was true for American soldiers, British soldiers, German soldiers, everyone. Obviously, it takes years to readjust, but Japanese soldiers had it the worst because of their code of, I think ethics would be the right word. Their code of honor, that's a much better word, code of honor. And it took them several years longer than everyone else to really readjust, because America didn't have that. The British didn't have that. I don't think the Soviets had it. Germans might have had something a bit similar. It was really if you don't do this, you're gonna die. It wasn't a code. It was just go kill or be killed. Anyway, references used here was only one, which was the website was the U.S. Naval Institute. Specific article, to us, it's Bushido. Really, now that we understand Bushido and kind of how it affected soldiers, a common follow-up question I would imagine being asked here would be, what happened to soldiers who disregarded Bushido and, chose life over honor? And I can really just say this it goes down a deep, twisted rabbit hole, and it really drives home, the point of how much Japan always chose honor, and then they would forcibly make you have honor, even if you didn't want to have honor. Like they want you to be honorful. You will be honorful. But if you choose not to, we'll make you do it anyway. We'll make you be honorful anyway. So, lose-lose situation again. To make this easier to understand, I'll lost my point. I'll use an example of a kamikaze pilot again. Going back to the pilot's example. If instead of, dive bombing straight into a U.S. military ship, and instead, gliding down to the water and swimming to shore, their plane hits the water, they miraculously survive, and there's an island here, and with my soldiers on it, my guys on it, swim over there, that was awful for them. Terrible choice. They should have just ran while they could. Yeah, if he was recognized at home, after, returning alive and being recognized, he's going to experience some terrible stuff to start. Really to start, if the pilot was recognized as a kamikaze that came back alive, which did happen, and this stuff did happen, they'd be called out, publicly shamed, by literally everyone, including friends and family, because everyone believed in this kind of honor. As well as, being socially abandoned. They had no one to talk to. Nobody would talk to them. And if people did talk to them, they were also considered dishonorable. So everyone didn't want that, because then they're going to be forced to kill themselves. So they wanted to have their honor and stay away. And then after that, higher-ups would eventually figure it out just from general word of mouth. And they would have lower levels, so like higher-ups would have lower levels, beat and brutalize him on a daily basis, and then, the soldiers that were hired to target the failed kamikaze pilot wouldn't hold back. They would literally beat them on a daily to the point of near death. And that's not even the end of it. And then after, the higher-ups, they determined among themselves that the soldier had suffered enough for their dishonor, and their failure as a kamikaze pilot, they would give one last order, and that final order was for the failed soldier to be dragged away from his family into a secluded, dark, shameful, kind of more gross place, such as an alleyway, or something of the likes, then be forced to be told to be forced to go through with the ritual of seppuku on themselves, and if the soldier didn't perform it himself willingly, well, the higher ups would just forcibly perform it on the guy himself. Just cut his stomach right open. And if he managed to avoid that, they lost all interest in the guy and would just kill him in a way that was considered shameful. Yeah. And then, citation here, BBC News, as the website. And then, what happens to soldiers who ignore Bushido? Oh wow, we finally reached the end of the essay. It only took me nearly an hour. Oh boy, this is going to take a long time to upload. So, in conclusion, the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was not a simple or clean decision. It came from years of brutal fighting, and difference, or it would be just difference, I don't know. And kind of the heavy reality was the Japanese military was willing to sacrifice every soldier and citizen before surrendering, really, if it weren't for these bombs. The United States had already seen how much Japan's interpretation of Bushido pushed soldiers to prefer death over capture, and that made war terrifyingly costly for Americans on that side of the war. Other options like slowly invading or just continuously invading Japan might have eventually worked, but the losses on both sides would have been, beyond anything the world had ever seen. And obviously, just the losses in and of itself from World War II were already just heartbreaking enough in how many people died, but this avoided millions more, if we're thinking about it. Leaders, American world leaders that were not a part of the Axis, but were a part of the Allies in this case, feared that dragging out the war would not only cost just general soldiers, Ally and Axis powers included, their lives, but it would also, give Japan more time to produce a deadly weapon of their own. So, with the Manhattan Project's success, the U.S. chose to bomb, not only to end the war, but to break the mindset that surrender was disgraceful to Japan. And, awful as it, awful as the destruction was, the bombs forced Japan to see that continuing the war, would mean the total annihilation of their people if they didn't surrender. And Emperor Hirohito's surrender speech shows that, the realization is what finally ended the conflict was just the brutalness of it. And, while the morals of the bombings can always be debated, the atomics brought an immediate end. Albeit terrible, but immediate end to the war that might have dragged out for even longer and caused greater suffering than if they had let it just play out, than by dropping the atomic weapons in this case, which brought, an unceremonious, albeit terrible, immediate end to the war. The horror of those 2 days really just kind of has to be remembered. But, so many lives were just spared because of it. When you think about it, it's like you're either losing 400,000 people in the long run from this one thing, or you're going to lose possibly up to 9 million plus people in this one nation. And that's not something anybody wants. Lives were spared from a potential another course of action when you really think about it. And, it only took me almost an hour, but, that's the end of my essay. I'm going to upload the pages document with this if you want to follow along. I'm so sorry if I went off on a couple tirades in this. I don't know what to say. I've been trying to film this for 2.5 hours almost, and sorry that the video had to be so long. Probably would have been the same length if I had done it over video call, because the way I present doesn't change. This is my third take of this video. So, that's the end of my essay. I have all my works cited on the next page, and you already heard them in the essay itself. That's all 8 pages of it. Thanks for watching, and again, sorry for the length. I wanted this to sound as legitimate as possible and not like a robot. That's kind of my thing, and when I do that, I talk. So sorry if it's too long. Feel free to skip around. Thanks for watching.